morning with you all. Please take your Bible and go to Esther. I'm thankful to be asked to speak, and I'm no stranger to Cornerstone. I attended Cornerstone back in 2004 when I was a student at the Bible College, and have often come when it works out with my flight and everything else to teach the class, that if I'm here on a Sunday, I always love to come. And so it certainly is an honor to speak to you this morning. There once was a king named Ahasuerus. Kind of a strange name, huh? Ahasuerus. And he was the king of the Persian Empire. You have to understand, the Persian Empire was a massive empire of 127 provinces, spanning from Ethiopia, Africa, all the way to India. So that would include modern-day countries like Israel, Egypt, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, all these different countries, Pakistan, India. This would all be part of the Persian Empire during this time when King Ahasuerus was in charge. And he was a man of fantastic wealth and power. And he decided that he wanted to display his treasures for 180 days. I don't know if that desire has ever come over you. I've never had that experience where I just sort of like put out my high school trophies or something for 180 days and invited people to look at them. But that's what he did, and he doesn't have just high school trophies. I mean, he has serious wealth, and so he puts it on display for 180 days. And at the end of that, he has a banquet, not for 1 or 2 days, but for 7 days. He has a 7-day party, and at the end of that, on the 7th day, he says, what would just really finish off this time of celebration, this whole 180 days plus the 7-day banquet, it would be to have the Queen Vashti. To have the Queen Vashti come, and so he sent for her, because when you're the king of the empire, you never do anything directly, right? You send somebody, hey, can you go get the queen? And the servant goes and gets the queen and comes back. But see, the thing about the queen is she didn't want to come. There's the wrinkle in the story, right? And so he sent for the queen, and she's over there having a banquet with the women, and the king's over there with the princes, and probably the wives of the princes are with Vashti in her banquet. And, I don't know enough about Persian culture to say what exactly the king wanted her to come for. I don't know if it was, something lewd he wanted her to do, or if he just wanted her to be present because she was a beautiful woman, and to sort of show her off to the people there. I don't know. But she said no. She definitely said no. And this, when it comes to public declarations that men make, in particular, if you say no, it really deflates the situation for the guy, And so he really, and we see that he has a little bit of an anger problem. Down here in verse 15, chapter 1, verse 15, the king asks the question after this happened, after he's been publicly insulted, according to the law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti? Because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs. I love how he puts that. He's like, according to the law, what should be done? He's very much distancing himself from this. And then he talks about himself in the third person. Because the queen disobeyed the king, or dishonored the king here, the command of the king. And so, he's definitely angry, and he wants to know what should be done. And so this servant of his pipes up and says, in the next verse there, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also all the princes and all the peoples who are in the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands, by saying, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought into his presence, but she did not come. I don't have to do what you say. The queen's not doing what her husband says. This day the ladies of Persia and Media who have heard the king's conduct will speak in the same way to all the king's princes, and there will be plenty of contempt and anger. I can't help but make fun of this. I'm sorry, but like if the queen disobeys the king, that does not necessarily mean that all the women in all of Persia are all going to go crazy. Really, it's not. And if you straighten her out, it's not like all the women in all the kingdom are suddenly going to snap into line. You know, I mean, there might be some relationship here, but it seems a little overstated. But like I said, I'm not an expert on Persian culture. If it pleases the king, he goes on, let a royal edict be issued by him, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be repealed, that Vashti may no longer come into the presence of King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is more worthy than she. When the king's edict which he will make is heard throughout all the kingdom, great as it is, then all women will give honor to their husbands, great and small. So that's what they did. The king decides, you know what, she didn't come when I called her. It was a public declaration. He probably felt embarrassed in front of everyone. That's it. She's not the queen anymore. I'm removing her from being the queen. And they start a search. And they scour the empire looking for beautiful young virgins to try to find a suitable queen to replace Vashti. And that's when we come across the man named Mordecai. Mordecai was a Jew who had survived. He's living in the Persian Empire during this period that was called the exile. Now, a number of the people had already come back to the land of Israel by then. About 50,000 people had come back to the land. But Mordecai was still living in a foreign land. You know, so he's Jewish. He's keeping the law of Moses. He's keeping the commands of God. He's trying to preserve be true to himself and his faith in a foreign land. And, you know, the pain of exile is really hard for us to wrap our minds around. I mean, imagine if Mexico, no, not Mexico. Imagine if China took over Georgia. And I know that sounds strange, but just imagine, that's why I said imagine, right? Imagine China took over, it couldn't take over the whole United States, but just took over Georgia and took all of the people out of Georgia, captured them, and brought you to China, to a certain province of China where you're going to live now over there. How traumatizing would that be for you? You know how hard Chinese is to learn? For Americans, for English speakers? Chinese is really hard, right? And you're in this foreign place, and you know what? Christianity is not the major faith in China today. I mean, there are Christians in China, but that's not the major faith in China. A lot of it's atheists, and they have a lot of Buddhists and Confucians and other faiths, right? And so now you're going to raise your kids in China. You don't have a choice in it. You've been deported to a foreign land. You've been exiled from your home. Right? And so what do? You train up your children. Suddenly training up your children is way more significant, because what are they trying to do in the schools? What are they trying to do in the workplace? Make them Chinese. Have them, combine with the culture of the land. And so now you dig in your heels. You develop, what the Jews did is they developed synagogues and training centers where they could be sure to pass down the faith, and they were meticulous in copying the scripture to pass down the faith to the next generation. And Mordecai is one of these Jews living in the exile, and he has this cousin named Hadassah. And Hadassah, both her parents had died. We don't know what happened. But they're living in a foreign land. They're living as Jews. And Mordecai is older than Hadassah. And so even though they're just cousins, he's more like an uncle to her in the sense that he's watching out for her. He's telling her what to do, what not to do, training her up. And the thing about Hadassah is she is drop-dead gorgeous. I mean, she is just beautiful. And she catches somebody's eye, and they decide, well, let's grab this girl. She looks like she would be a suitable candidate to become the next queen. And Mordecai says to her, look, whatever you do, don't tell them your nationality. Don't tell them you're Jewish. Don't tell them your faith. Go by the name Esther. Go by the name Esther. Because a name like Esther in Persia is just like John in America. You know what I mean? Nobody's going to raise an eyebrow. But Hadassah, I mean, that's a bit ethnic, right? So go by Esther, blend in, see what happens here. And so that's what happens. Look at Esther chapter 2, verse 17. And of all the women that the king's men collected, he loved her the most, right? Esther 2:17. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So she wins the Miss Persia pageant. She gets first place. She's now the queen. I mean, talk about a position of honor. From nobody to the queen of the empire. That's pretty good. And around this time, Mordecai, he's not officially in the palace, but he's lurking. Just like a good uncle would lurk. And he's making sure that she's okay, but he can't really go into the palace and manage the situation. He's not part of the government. But he's around, He's keeping his eye out on her, just like a parent or an uncle or an aunt would do. And one day he sees a plot where these two guys decide they're going to assassinate the king. And Mordecai discovers it. And so he tells his cousin Esther, he tells her, and she goes and she alerts the authorities. They arrest these guys. It turns out to be true, and they are hung for attempting to assassinate the king. And then we get introduced to Haman. This is chapter 3. If Haman were an animal, he would be a peacock. Have you ever seen a peacock before? A peacock is a bird. I don't even think they can fly, but boy, they have a lot of feathers, right? And a peacock, what does it do? It likes to spread all its feathers out to make it look as big and impressive as it possibly can be. And that's how Haman was. Haman was a little full of himself. The king promoted him above all the other princes. And in the Persian culture, honored people you would bow before as they passed by. Okay, so as Haman comes into the centers of power and the government and the palace and these sorts of places, everyone would bow to him. And Haman loved it. He loved that they would bow to him. And except there was this one Mordecai. And Mordecai just would not bow to Haman. And Haman didn't even really notice Mordecai at first. But the other people that were all on their knees noticed Mordecai, like, hey, what's he doing over there? Why isn't he bowing? Right? And so they asked him day after day, Mordecai, why don't you bow when Haman goes by? And Mordecai won't answer them. And they asked him the next day. It happens again. It happens every day because he's right there nearby where all the action's happening, but he's not really involved. But he's interested, and so he won't bow. Haman walks by. He won't bow, and finally they wear him down, and he says, "I can't because I'm a Jew." And they're like, "Well, we're a Jew. I don't know what that means, but this is certainly interesting. Let's see what Haman thinks about that." And so the servants go and they tell Haman, and they want to know if Mordecai's reason is going to stand. And so they go to Haman and they say, Haman, there's this one guy here, this Jewish guy, Mordecai, and he doesn't bow to you. And Haman just loses it. I mean, just like fireworks going off, foaming at the mouth. Okay, man, that's an exaggeration. But like he just explodes in fury and anger. What? There's somebody that won't bow to me? Do they know who I am? Right? And Haman's filled with rage. And it says in chapter 3, verse 6, it says that he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. He said, I'm not even going to touch, because all he has to do is this, and Mordecai's dead. That's all it takes, right? But he disdained. He said, I'm not just going to lay hands on Mordecai alone. No. I want to destroy all of Mordecai's people throughout the land. Not just here in the capital of Susa. No, I don't want to just exterminate all the Jews in the capital of Susa. I want to destroy Mordecai and all of his people, his aunts, his uncles, his parents, his children, all of his relatives, anywhere throughout the entire 127 provinces of the Persian Empire. What? You know what we call that? We call that genocide, right? Haman wants to genocide the Jews. Look at chapter 3, verse 8. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of other people, and they do not observe the king's laws. So it is not in the king's interest to let them remain." What? So we're going to kill them all because they have different laws? It's just bizarre. "If it's pleasing to the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry on the king's business to put into the king's treasuries." Then the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. The king said to Haman, "The silver is yours, and the people also, to do with them as you please." And so Haman goes into, now you got to get the picture here. The king is just sort of like off doing whatever, right? I mean, if they didn't have video games, but it's like the picture I get is like the king's over here playing some video games, and Haman comes in. He's like, there's this people, yada yada yada. I'll pay for it. Sign here. And the king's like, all right, whatever. I'm playing, obviously they didn't have video games, but like he was busy, and he wasn't like, whatever, man. Haman's just like, look, I'm going to pay for it. I'm going to organize it. I'm going to send the letters. And the king's like, all right, here, take the ring. Go do what you got to do. So that's what Haman does. And Haman is a superstitious man, so he wants to cast lots to figure out what time of year would be the best time to exterminate all of Mordecai's people. And so they're casting lots, and it lands on the 12th month. It's the first month when the edict goes out. So you got to imagine this. They send out these edicts to all the different provinces. And you know what the edict says? That everyone should kill the Jews. And not just right away. On this particular day, the 13th day of the 12th month. Right? How uncomfortable would you be as a Jewish person living in one of the provinces? Right? Let's say you had a shop. Let's say you sold saddles for horses. Okay? Now people are going to come by, and you're over there working hard on the leather and everything, making your saddles. And somebody comes by, and you're like, you want to buy a saddle? They're like, no, I'm going to wait. I'll be back in December. Right? That's pretty freaky. And so everybody is sort of like salivating at destroying the Jews and taking their stuff throughout the entire kingdom. I mean, it is a horrible situation we're dealing with here. And Mordecai finds out. Mordecai finds out. You know how he finds out? Just like everybody else. There's the edict tacked up in the city square. And he reads it. And it says that in 12 months, all the Jews are to be exterminated. And the government is not going to protect them. Whoever wants to kill them can kill them and take their stuff. I mean, I can't even imagine the pain in Mordecai's heart. I mean, can you imagine being the one responsible for that? Right? So what does he do? He tears his clothes. He puts on sackcloth. He puts ashes on his head. He falls down, and he's wailing in the city center. He's wailing. He's crying. All the provinces have fasting and weeping and wailing. So Esther finds out that Mordecai's out causing a scene, right? So she goes, or she doesn't go, she sends servants because she's the queen. She sends servants and give Mordecai some clothes. I heard he's like in sackcloth. Give him some clothes. That's how out of touch she is. Esther's in a bubble, all right? It's called the palace, right? She doesn't even know what's going on. And she sends the servants, and they want to help Mordecai out. And Mordecai tells the servants, look at chapter 4, verse 11. The king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any... Well, let me back up. Mordecai tells the servants, go tell Esther she needs to go. She needs to go do something. She needs to go do something because we're all going to die. And this is Esther's response, Esther 4:11. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king in the inner court who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. Esther's in an interesting position here. Nobody knows she's Jewish. She could ride this thing out, right? The king's probably not going to kill her, right? She's pretty safe, relatively speaking. But the king, we know about the king that he has, how do I put it? He has anger issues, right? The one time the queen didn't come, and what did he do? No more queen, right? We don't even know what happened to her after that, but we just know that she's not the queen anymore, right? And so he had another law in place, which was, unless I call, you don't come. If I do come, you do come, or if I do call, you do come, and if I don't call, you don't come, right? It's pretty simple. And the rule is automatic death penalty if you approach the king, unless he pardons you by holding out the golden scepter, right? So she's like, look, it's been 30 days. I haven't seen the king. I can't just go in there and ask him. If I go in there and ask him, he could be in a bad mood. Did you hear about the last queen? He could be in a bad mood. I don't want to get killed. What good's that going to do? So this is what Mordecai says, verse 13. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. Look at Mordecai's faith, huh? There's a man of God right there. He knows that his situation is dire. He's about to, he's got 12 months, and then he's dead. Who do you think the first one is they're going to kill? Right? He's the one that wouldn't bow. Every day is agony for Mordecai. Every day. And you know what? He still doesn't bow. He still doesn't bow every day after this. And he says, you know what, Esther, cousin, I don't know if you're there for such a time as this. I don't know. But if you don't do anything, you're going to perish in this thing. And God is still going to deliver his people. That's some faith there, huh? That's Mordecai. He has a perspective on God's history. And so then Esther says in chapter 4, verse 16, go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. That's what Esther says. You see that? That's the faith of Abraham right there. That's the courage of Daniel. That's the heart of David. That's some person of courage. That's Esther. Many of us don't have the courage to do the little things. We don't want to trust what God says about our regular lifestyle stuff. You could pick so many different topics. What about taxes, right? It's kind of like tax season right now, isn't it? For some of us, we did it like January 1st. But it's so easy to cheat on your taxes, isn't it? It's so easy to just fidget a little bit here or at the job to just, cut out a little bit early. It's so easy to do those things. And yet, a person of courage says, you know what? Even though this might cost me something, I'm still going to do the right thing. That's what a person of courage does, right? Somebody gets bullied on the playground, right? The person of courage, the woman of courage, the man of courage says, hey, knock it off. Now you're the target. So be it. Doing the right thing, even if it costs you something. That's what courage is. Courage has nothing to do with not having fear. It has nothing to do with no fear. Courage is pushing through fear to do the right thing anyhow. And that's what Esther does. And she doesn't try to find a loophole. She doesn't try to be so clever and get out of the whole situation. She says, look, I got to do this. And I ask you this, where are the Esthers of our day? Where are the Esthers of today? Where's the woman of courage who says, no, I will not give in. I will not chicken out. I will not go the easy way. I will not just save my own skin. I'm going to stand up for what's right. And if I perish, I perish. That's what she said. Where is the Esther of our day? Where is that person of courage? Because God works with such people. Who was Esther? Who was Esther? She was just a displaced refugee peasant girl. That's all she was, right? And now she's queen of the whole empire. But she hasn't forgotten God. She hasn't forgotten God. And she's in a situation where the death penalty is automatic. There's no safety net. It's not like she goes in and she's like, oh, hey, King. Oops, sorry about that, Sean Patrick. Hey, King, I just want to talk. And, I made you a roast tonight. There's no working the situation. Like, if he's in a bad mood and you go in, you're dead. You're dead, right? There's no safety net. It's not like in the circus with the trapeze, and then there's the safety net you fall into if it doesn't work out, right? There's none of that. She can't cross her fingers and put them behind her back and be like, oh, just kidding. There's no just kidding. If she goes in and he's angry about something, running an empire can be frustrating. She's dead. He'll find another queen. He's got a room full of women right next door of potential candidates. Right? This is not 21st century America. This is ancient Persia. It's a very different place and a very different time. That's what we need today, is people of courage. We don't need more fakers. Our biggest problem as Christians, in a public relations sense, is that we have so many fakers, right? What we need are real Christ followers, not people that are just going to check a box when people ask, what religion are you? That's not what we need. We need people of genuine courage, like Esther. People that are going to say, I will speak the kingdom gospel. I will speak this message. I will tell my Baptist coworker about the one God. I will speak to this person over here who is a Buddhist. Or this one over here about homosexuality. Or this one over here about this other issue that's controversial in our day. Because, and I'm not saying we need to be belligerent and rude. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what Jesus teaches us, right? Jesus says to love your neighbor. Look, if you were lost, wouldn't you want somebody to help you get found? I would. Actually, to be honest, when I get lost, I tend not to ask for directions. I so love the technology age we live in. That has really helped me with that because I never wanted to stop and ask for directions. But you know what? I did want to be found if I got lost. I wanted to find my way. We need to be the people like Esther. And I think about that where she says, Mordecai says to her, he says, look, who knows? Maybe you're here for such a time as this. Yeah, right? You know what I'm talking about? Maybe you're here for such a time as this. That's what he says to her, right? You know what her first response is? What's her first response? Fast. That's what she says to Mordecai. Fast. I need you to fast for me. Did you see that? Look at that. That's verse 16. Go assemble the Jews. She says, go get everybody and fast for me. That's what I want you to do. Where does that come from? Where does that come from? How does she know to do that? She's been faithful in the little things, right? Is your immediate response when you're facing a terrible situation, somebody's sick, somebody else is in trouble with whatever, is your immediate response, all right, we need to get everyone together and we need to fast? That's an unusual response, a very godly response, right? She's faithful in the little things, so when the big moment comes, she's like, all right, this is what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get together, we're going to fast. And look at this fast, too. 3 days, no eat, no drink. Night and day. I've fasted before in my Christian walk. I always drink water. You know how many days you can go without water before you die? It's not that long. Right? This is a serious, extreme call to God. Fasting is like putting an antenna on your prayers to God. it just boosts the whole thing. It's an intensifier. Every time you get hungry, you're like, Lord God, help me with this thing I'm praying for. Right? Every time it's a reminder. And then you add to that not one antenna, but all these people together. They're all praying. There's all these prayers going up to God. And Esther says, and I will fast. And I'm going to have all my women, I don't care if they're not Jewish, I'm going to have them fast with me. That's what she did. And then she said, I'm going to go in, and if I perish, I perish. So be it. But I'm going to go in. I'm going to do the right thing, even if it costs me my life. And you know what? Jesus is no different. I'm getting carried away here. But Jesus is no different. Jesus teaches about discipleship. You read Jesus on discipleship. Look up the phrase, cannot be my disciple, in the Bible sometime. Cannot be my disciple. You'll find that he says that sometimes. In fact, 3 times in Luke, where he says, if you don't put me ahead of your family and your own life and your children's life, you cannot be my disciple. He says, if you don't take up your cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. If you don't renounce all that you have, you cannot be my disciple. Jesus' qualifications for discipleship are not that you're wealthy, or not that you're smart, or not that you come from a good family. They're not that you are popular or successful or a whiz at social media. What is Jesus' requirement for being a disciple? Commitment. If you give him 100% commitment, you qualify. I don't care how old or young you are, you qualify. And if you qualify, then you can follow him till the end. And that's what takes courage in our own time. But we got to get back to Esther, because we don't want to leave her hanging there, right? So she goes into the king's courtyard, right? And the king holds out the scepter to her, and he says, well, what's troubling you, Esther? What's troubling you? And she says, well, I'd really like to have dinner. I'd like to have a banquet tonight. And so they prepared a banquet, and she says, I'd like you to bring Haman along. Can you bring Haman? It'll just be a nice little private banquet. And she's smart. She waits till after they drink wine. And then the king says to her, what's your petition? What is it, honey? What is it? And then he's prone to these grandiose statements. Up to half the kingdom, dear. Whatever you want. She says, this is great. Just one more night. Give me one more night. Come back tomorrow, you and Haman, and we'll do this again. And the king's like, all right. I like to eat, I like to drink, I like to be with the queen and Haman. This is fine, right? And so they go home, and Haman goes home that night, and he sees, he's got a spring in his step, like Haman. He's like, yeah, just had dinner with the queen, the king, no big deal. Actually, it is a big deal. And he leaves the place, and everybody bows, right? Because that's what you do when Haman walks by, except for who? Mordecai. Mordecai's still right there. And Haman is he's just so angry. He doesn't know what to do. So he goes home. This is just so unbelievable to me. He goes home, and he gathers his wife and his friends together, and he recounts to them the glory of his riches and the number of his sons. And every time the king has magnified him, and how the king put him above all the other princes, and how even tonight he had a private banquet with Esther the queen. And can you imagine this guy? He's like, first of all, let me tell you about my stock portfolio. Let me tell you about how many kids I have and how good they are. I mean, he's just bragging about himself, right? And then he says, but Mordecai doesn't recognize me. All of this is nothing because Mordecai doesn't think I'm so great. And it's like a pinprick to a balloon every time he sees Mordecai. Because Mordecai's like, you're not so great. And he's like, yes, I am. He's, no, I'm not going to bow. And there it is. So his sweet wife says, honey, the solution to your problem is to build a gallows 75 feet high. Gallows is the wooden frame used to hang people. What a nice wife, good advice that she gives him here. And in the morning, asks the king to kill Mordecai. and you can hang him on your gallows here. So that's what he does. He gets this gallows together. It's a major construction event, and he gets it all done. And then he goes to bed, and Haman sleeps like a baby. He sleeps like a baby because now he just had this dinner with the queen. Everything is going so well in his life. There's just this one problem, this one stupid man that won't recognize him, and he's going to kill that guy tomorrow. Sleep like a baby. However, the king can't sleep. So the king wakes up in the middle of the night, and when you wake up in the middle of the night, I guess what you do, instead of warm milk, is you have a servant read the history of the kingdom to you, and the servant's reading the history of the kingdom to him, and what ends up happening is he hears about Mordecai and how Mordecai had discovered the assassination plot and all this, right? And so it's starting to get on towards morning, and the king asks a question to his servant, well, what's been done for Mordecai? Has anybody honored him? Has anybody given him a promotion? Has anybody given him a reward? And the servant says, no, nobody's done anything for Mordecai. And just then, Haman's at the door because Haman got a bright start on the morning. He's ready to go. And Haman's like, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to say to the king, look, king, there's this one guy, he's no good. I'm going to pay for everything. I already built the gallows. Just sign right here. Right? That's Haman's plan. So Haman walks in the door. The king says, come on in. And the king asks a question to Haman, what do you think someone should do for the person the king wants to honor? And Haman's like, well, who would the king want to honor more than me? And so Haman says, what you should do is put him on a royal horse that the king has ridden, and put a royal robe that the king has worn on him. Basically make him king for a day, right? And bring him through the city square and have a herald go before him and say, thus it shall be done for the one the king wants to honor. Right? And he's this is what he wants for himself. I told you he's like a peacock. And the king says to him, excellent, Haman, do it for Mordecai.